Welcome back, everyone. Before I do introduction, just want to remind people to go check out the tables from all of our sponsors. They have some very interesting things for you to see. And also a reminder that there's an event this evening at MOPOP, the Museum of Popular Culture. It's open to all attendees. You have to get down there yourself. It's not that far. But please come by and have a good time tonight. So next up, we have Siobhan Dolen. She'll be presenting how to use network trust to reduce authentication fatigue. She's a solution consultant for Lexis Nexis Risk Solutions. So welcome, Siobhan.
Thank you, David. Okay, I have made it up on the stage. Step one complete. Big green button, I'm assuming. So yes, I'm going to be talking about a network of trust, and I'm going to be focusing on how to use networked trust as a method to ease authentication fatigue for the consumer and kind of how we might do that. The nightmare scenario that I am envisioning when I put this together was going to Starbucks in the morning for my morning cup of caffeine to awaken, then having to authenticate that payment, traveling down the shop to grab a bouquet of flowers for my mom, should probably buy her some, and having to authenticate that payment, and then walking to my bank. Maybe I want to open up a savings account for my kid. I need to authenticate myself there. Authentication, 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 authentication. There's a lot for users to kind of manage with all of their accounts, all of their credentials, and now all of their authentication steps and tasks that they have. Hopefully I can paint a picture of how we might alleviate some of that pain. The network effect, as I'm sure most of you are familiar, is pretty clutch when it comes to easing this burden on the consumer, where we can have a collaboration between agencies, institutions, or any type of credential holder, and have them be not quite a credential issuer per se, but an entity that has a relationship with that consumer. If all of those folks network together, a consumer can pass through each of their daily tasks that require authentication, and this network can ease the burden of authentication by sharing the trust signals that have come from that user. And this was a happenstance little screenshot that I grabbed from Ms. Flanagan saying that we're going to need to have knowledge sharing if we're going to kind of get anywhere with open identity, self-sovereign identity, all of the issues and things that we're interested in here. And I thought that this was very apt. We need to share the knowledge, and how do we share knowledge quickly and in real time? We use a network. So, as you probably know, there are networks of bad actors, fraudsters, thieves, anyone who can broker your already compromised identity data from any of the massive data leaks that have happened over the last, decade. Are we going on data leaks now? More than a decade, probably. So, assuming that our identities and our data is kind of out there for sale, we need to have this safety net of trust, knowing that the authentic person is using the data appropriately within that transaction. And the outcome of that transaction can then be shared in a networked manner. With that network knowledge, that's where we can intercept all of the authentications that a user may experience during their day. And we say, okay, Starbucks approved my purchase, Books approved my purchase, Wells Fargo approved my account creation, and now I want to go buy a car on Carvana. So how is Carvana going to know that I am legit? They can listen to this network that exists, and it does exist today, but kind of not in the application that I'm talking about today. And Carvana can know that Siobhan has been authenticated successfully with no risky signals. So we're listening for risk always, and we can now hear this echo of trust from my previous transactions that very day, or whatever time span is appropriate for a given transaction. And so I can go buy a car, and that experience for me as a user could be made easier when Carvana listens to the network of others who have already authenticated me. And there are a couple of things that are critical there. We need some assurance of who is delivering this trusted signal. So there can't just be Joe Schmo pre-Series B startup that says, oh yes, I have this whole database of users and all of them are already authenticated. That's great. That's probably just a setup for money muling or some other kind of disaster waiting to happen. But if we have this trusted set of entities, they could be education systems, they could be banks, they could be agencies, any form of institution where a user has to have a interaction in order to complete a task, that's where that network is built. And so the SSA could potentially listen to Starbucks and say, oh yeah, we've already authenticated this user, let's make this experience a bit easier for them. And the key for all of this is the rapidity of this information sharing. This trusted authentication network needs to be in real time because an identity compromise or an account takeover can happen at any time. And so we need to slowly build the trust on a user, but then be able to rapidly revoke it when a risky transaction has happened. Say I failed to authenticate myself into my bank 3 times. Oh, there's a revocation of trust. So there's some methodology for communicating those signals rapidly with the network. In this thought experiment that I have here, I had a couple of assumptions. The first was that we would want to have this kind of knowledge sharing, like this would be helpful, and that the participating institutions would want to remain anonymous. They don't necessarily want to know that it's Starbucks saying that Siobhan has been validated and authenticated. They want to know that a credited institution has authenticated this user, and we can take that data that is trusted and interrogable. You can interrogate that data, whatever that verb is. And the second assumption that I have is that this was kind of fun doing this research. I was trying to say, well, do people actually want to help each other? Like, is there a human function for wanting to share this trust? Like, am I gonna trust David to babysit my kids, or am I just gonna trust him to like hang on to my wallet for a few minutes? Like, what level of trust do we have? And so my research went down a rabbit hole, which is my typical thing, and I found that, has anybody heard of the bystander effect? Where if someone is like hit by the car and nobody comes to the aid because they're okay, I'm getting head nods. So that turns out to, in practice, really be false. People are actually very willing to come to the aid of another and in kind of disregarding their own safety often. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but I wanted to pull out that, yes, people do, in fact, intrinsically want to help each other out. And when we build this network infrastructure, we can do that rapidly in real time. Okay, and for my lovely assistant in the back, this is where I'm going to need the scrolling assistance. So some challenges around this concept, the transparency around the sources of trust needs to be there. There needs to be some set of principles and some set of specs where the institution that is corroborating with this network is governed by this set of principles, and they have been vetted by a set of specs where we can have that trust assurance of the institution that is acting kind of like this secure, this certificate authority, this issuer. These institutions are kind of in that vein where they have been trusted to provide this assurance that trust is in fact present within this transaction. So we need to be able to transparently know who is involved here. So that's a little tricky if people don't want to share their brand with the network. And there's a couple of ways around that, but I personally feel like it would be just better if we knew where the source of data was coming from. For the network to work and for our kind of decentralization of trust and the shareability of this trust, we're not going to rely on blockchain for that for a variety of reasons. Firstly, and kind of most importantly, the reconciliation of blockchain can be problematic. You can have whole segments of a chain be irretrievable if there's some kind of cataclysm at the hardware level. And it's inefficient, super slow, and it's super thirsty in power and those kinds of resources that are obviously needed for maintaining this network. And zero trust has its challenges where it's incredibly time thirsty to deploy. It's a nightmare for cybersecurity teams to try to keep up with the various user types. We've got a 0% cybersecurity unemployment rate, meaning that we've got more jobs than people to do them, and perhaps zero trust is a very expensive option because we need to hire 50 people to ensure that zero trust is being fulfilled. And zero trust also doesn't protect us against any kind of insider threat damage where we might be able to, using this network of trust and existing risk signals around transaction monitoring, for lack of a better phrase, we can use this network to see if there's a behavioral change or if there's some kind of change to the pattern of this person that might lead them to be an insider threat. Thank you for scrolling. Thank you. And within this network, this is kind of just what it could look like. You've got a variety of banks, and these don't necessarily have to be distributed within one geographic region. This is really where a kind of a global citizen or our digital nomads might be benefiting more than just me who stays within the same 60 square miles all the time. We've got these different banks across, country doesn't matter, the origin of these institutions doesn't matter, but the fundamental activity of these institutions is large enough that they as an institution are trustworthy, as in they perform transactions like any other institution, and they're following these steps to authenticate their users in similar fashions. So this is kind of what the network would look like. And as people traverse the network and gain their authenticated kind of trust trail, their presence within the network can thicken. And so if I, as a consumer, am taking my authentication with me, anytime I authenticate myself, my audit trail gets a little bit longer and a little bit longer and a little bit longer. And the length of the audit trail is another piece of data that we can use to risk assess any transaction going forward. With distributed people working remotely, traveling semi-regularly, and going from their private life into their working life, I work out of my house now. Not that I like doing it, it's just a matter of have to do it. And the authentications that I have to do on a daily basis, I counted once and it was 33 authentications that I had to do myself through one of my trusted devices on any given day. And I mean, that's not really a lot of time, right? Like, authentication doesn't take a lot of time, but just having to remember to bring my device with me and always have it with me. And also I have two devices. I've got my personal phone and I keep one for work because nary the twain shall meet. And I don't want to authenticate so much. And I just want somebody to know that I have authenticated myself already and tell that guy so that he doesn't have to authenticate me again. Let's see. Can you scroll for me? Thank you. So how do we get here? Well, we already have a very large network of identities. We have large networks of digital identities that are existing in semi-silos. There was a lovely talk yesterday, and I'm going to blank on her name, but VP at MasterCard is building one of these identity centers, and it's a modification on self-sovereign identity and digital identity. But that could be one of these kind of issuing authorities where if this issuing authority from MasterCard has authenticated me, I can then use my MasterCard account to go purchase things down the line, groceries, flowers, cars, whatever. So we need to have that network, and it's in place today, and there are easy ways for us to connect these networks together to share all of this information. And there would just need to be a governance model for that assurance of trust from these institutions so that we know who is participating within this ecosystem. And we also need to be able to have that rapid kill switch for the revocation of trust. Because yes, it would be very helpful if I didn't have to do 33 authentications in my day, but if my phone is stolen and somehow they're able to access it and then they've got access to my wallet kind of on my phone, I want to be able to call my bank and say, my device is compromised, that bank locks my phone, and any authentication done by that phone by anybody claiming to be me is revoked and the network is alerted. Because the proliferation of damage is really the problem for the consumer when they have either a lost device or a lost payment method, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine the catastrophes that are there. And I think I am almost done. Yes. And real-time assessments are the table stakes. Thank you. That was the last point that I wanted to make on that one. So we have to be able to have that rapid communication in real time. So we just need folks to adopt, participate in the trust network that exists today, or you can build your own and connect to the mega networks. And then we just need our institutions to participate and tell us when we have good authentications and when we've had denied authentications, so that as users and as participants within this ecosystem, we can trust each other. Thanks.
Oops. So we do have some time for some questions, and there's one here from online. It says, isn't it the use case of Global Assured Identity Network, or GAIN, for this type of problem statement?
Can you say that one more time?
Is this the same use case as what GAIN's trying to solve?
I'm sure that there are several overlaps, and there's applicability in a number of different scenarios. So, yes? Question mark?
Any questions here in the audience? Toward the back? Nope. No more online? Well, thank you again, Siobhan. That was
Thank you.
great. Appreciate it.